The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of our family's country club dining room. My mother's face had gone pale, then red, then something beyond anger I'd never seen before. "You're 32 years old, Rebecca," she hissed, her voice cutting through the congratulatory chatter around my sister's engagement party. "And what do you have to show for it?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing." My father didn't even look up from his salmon. "We tried, honey," he said to my mother, as if I wasn't standing right there. "Some people just aren't meant for success." That was Tuesday. By Friday, the Secretary of Defense was calling me General Martinez and asking for my tactical assessment on a situation that could reshape global politics. "I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." The worst part wasn't the broken glass or the stares from the other families at the Hillcrest Country Club. It wasn't even my sister Emma's apologetic smile as she tried to salvage her engagement celebration. The worst part was that deep down, I wondered if they were right. I'd spent the last 3 years working as a freelance consultant, which was just a polite way of saying I picked up whatever work I could find. Data analysis for small businesses, research projects for grad students who couldn't be bothered to do their own work, technical writing for companies that needed someone to make their instruction manuals readable. None of it was glamorous, and none of it impressed my parents. My mother, Patricia Holloway Sinclair, came from old Connecticut money, the kind of family that had their names on hospital wings and university libraries. My father, Dr. James Sinclair, was a renowned cardiac surgeon whose patient list read like a who's who of Fortune 500 CEOs. They lived in a world where success was measured in newspaper mentions, charity gala invitations, and the kind of achievements that got your photo in the society pages. My sister Emma had followed the script perfectly: Harvard Law, then a position at one of Boston's most prestigious firms. She was marrying another lawyer, someone from a family that owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Boston. Their wedding announcement would run in the New York Times, and my parents couldn't have been prouder. Then there was me, the family disappointment, who couldn't even maintain a steady job. What they didn't know, what I could never tell them, was that my freelance consulting wasn't exactly what it appeared to be. The data analysis I did for small businesses involved tracking financial patterns for organizations that didn't officially exist. The research projects weren't for grad students, but for intelligence agencies that needed academic cover for their operations. And those instruction manuals, they were operational protocols for situations most people couldn't imagine. I was recruited during my senior year at MIT, not by a traditional employer, but by someone who'd been watching my work in applied mathematics and pattern recognition. Dr. Sarah Chen had approached me after a guest lecture I'd given on predictive modeling. She was interested in my thesis on using mathematical algorithms to predict human behavior in crisis situations. "Have you ever considered working for the government?" she'd asked over coffee near campus. I laughed. "You mean like the IRS? Something a bit more specialized," she'd said, sliding a business card across the table. It was plain white with just a phone number and the seal of the Department of Defense. That conversation led to 18 months of training that officially never happened. Psychological operations, crisis management, strategic planning for scenarios that kept world leaders awake at night. I learned how to analyze terrorist networks like mathematical equations and predict geopolitical shifts like weather patterns. My specialization became something called asymmetric threat assessment, basically figuring out what enemies might do when conventional military thinking said they'd do something else. I was good at it. Really good. Good enough that by age 28, I held a security clearance that would make most Pentagon officials jealous. But I couldn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not my sister, not my few remaining friends from college. As far as they knew, I was just Rebecca Sinclair, the family screw-up who couldn't hold down a real job. The irony was crushing. While my parents worried about my inability to succeed in their world, I was briefing cabinet members on threats to national security. While they questioned my work ethic, I was pulling 70-hour weeks analyzing intelligence reports that could prevent international incidents. While they saw failure, I was being fast-tracked through a career path that didn't exist on any org chart. The loneliness was the hardest part. I'd sit through family dinners listening to my father discuss his latest medical breakthrough, or my mother detail her charity work. Desperate to share something, anything, about what I actually did with my days. But the oath I'd taken wasn't just about keeping government secrets. It was about protecting the people I loved from the knowledge of just how dangerous the world really was. My cover story had to be believable, which meant it had to be disappointing. A successful daughter with a mysterious job would raise questions. A struggling consultant barely making ends meet. That just confirmed what my parents already suspected about my lack of ambition. The Tuesday night disaster at Emma's engagement party had been building for months. My parents' patience with my career uncertainty had worn thin. They'd started making pointed comments about their friends' children who were doctors, lawyers, and successful entrepreneurs. They'd begun excluding me from certain social events, claiming they didn't want to put me in awkward positions when people asked about my work. Maybe it's time to consider going back to school, my mother had suggested the week before the party. Get an MBA. Do something practical. I'd wanted to tell her that I'd already completed advanced degrees through classified programs, that I held certifications in crisis management and strategic analysis that were more valuable than any MBA. That 3 different government agencies had tried to recruit me away from my current position in the last 6 months alone. Instead, I nodded and promised to look into graduate programs. The engagement party was supposed to be a celebration, but it became something else entirely. My parents' frustration with my life choices spilled over into public humiliation. As Emma showed off her ring to family friends, my mother launched into what she probably thought was a helpful comparison. Emma has always been so focused, she told Mrs. Wellington, loud enough for half the room to hear. She knew exactly what she wanted and went after it. Not like some people who just drift through life without any real direction. That's when my father chimed in with his salmon-focused commentary about trying their best with me. That's when my mother declared I had nothing to show for my 32 years. And that's when I finally understood that no amount of secret success could fill the void created by their disappointment in who they thought I was. I left the party early, driving home to my modest apartment in Arlington. Modest because anything too nice would have raised questions about my income sources. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the kind of furniture you buy when you're supposedly struggling financially, and wondered how much longer I could maintain this double life. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. I'm sorry about tonight, they don't understand you, but I know you're doing important work, whatever it is. Emma didn't know the details, but she'd always been perceptive. She'd noticed that my financial struggles never seemed to affect my ability to help out when she needed something. She'd observed that I was remarkably well informed about international events for someone who supposedly spent her days writing user manuals. I texted back, "Don't worry about it. Congratulations on your engagement." But I was worried about it. The weight of living a lie was becoming unbearable, especially when that lie painted me as a failure in the eyes of the people whose opinion mattered most to me. I had no idea that in less than 72 hours, my 2 worlds were about to collide in the most spectacular way possible. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Washington, D.C. feel almost magical. I was nursing my second cup of coffee and reviewing encrypted files on my laptop when my secure phone rang. The caller ID showed only a series of numbers that made my stomach drop. "Martinez here," I answered, using my operational surname. "General, we have a situation developing in the Eastern Mediterranean. I need you at the Pentagon in 30 minutes. The voice belonged to Deputy Director Harrison Walsh, someone who'd never contacted me directly before. In our world, when senior officials started making personal calls, it meant something had gone very wrong. I threw on my most professional suit, one of the few expensive items I owned that I had to hide from my family by keeping it at a dry cleaner's under an assumed name. 23 minutes later, I was walking through security checkpoints that didn't exist on any public Pentagon tour. The briefing room was already full when I arrived. I recognized most of the faces: career intelligence officers, military strategists, a few people whose official titles bore no resemblance to their actual responsibilities. But there were others I'd never seen before, wearing the kind of serious expressions that suggested they'd been pulled from very important meetings. "Gentlemen, General Martinez," Walsh announced as I took my seat. "As of 0600 this morning, we've detected unusual military movements across 3 separate regions. Our analysts believe these are coordinated, but the pattern doesn't match any conventional strategic doctrine. He clicked a remote and satellite images filled the wall screen. Ship movements in the Mediterranean, troop buildups along borders that had been quiet for decades, supply convoys moving through territories where they had no apparent business. This is where General Martinez's expertise becomes crucial, Walsh continued. The pattern suggests asymmetric coordination, multiple actors working toward a common goal while maintaining plausible deniability about their connections. I studied the images, my mind automatically processing the data points. During my training, I'd learned to see these situations like three-dimensional puzzles. Each movement was a piece, and the complete picture only emerged when you could visualize how all the pieces fit together across both space and time. The timing is too precise to be coincidental, I said, standing to approach the screen. Look at the intervals. Every major movement happened within a 6-hour window across multiple time zones. That requires coordination at a level that suggests either a single command structure or months of advanced planning. I traced patterns on the screen with a laser pointer, but here's what's interesting. Each individual movement is defensible as routine military activity. Port calls, training exercises, equipment transfers. Separately, they're innocent. Together, they're positioning for something much larger. The room fell silent as I outlined my assessment. These weren't random military activities. They were preparatory moves for what could escalate into a regional conflict that might draw in multiple world powers. The kind of situation that started small and mushroomed into global crises before anyone realized what was happening. "What's your recommendation, General?" asked a woman I didn't recognize, though her bearing suggested she was used to making decisions that affected millions of people. "We need to determine the end goal," I said. "Right now we're seeing the setup, but we don't know what game they're playing. I need access to intelligence reports from the last 6 months, communication intercepts, and financial transaction data from key players in all 3 regions." Walsh nodded. "Done. How long do you need?" "Give me 48 hours for initial analysis, 72 for a complete strategic assessment." What I didn't mention was that this was exactly the kind of scenario that had consumed my nightmares for the past 2 years. During my advanced training, we'd run simulations of coordinated asymmetric actions designed to exploit the gaps in international response protocols. I'd helped design some of the mathematical models we used to predict how quickly these situations could spiral out of control. The meeting broke up with various officials heading off to brief their respective agencies. I was gathering my notes when Walsh approached me privately. "Rebecca," he said, using my real first name for the first time I could remember. "I need you to understand something. If your analysis is correct, and this is coordinated preparation for a larger action, we're looking at a potential crisis that could require presidential-level decision-making within days." The weight of his words settled over me. In my world, presidential-level decision-making meant one thing: situations serious enough that the commander-in-chief might need to be moved to secure locations while military options were considered. "I understand, sir. One more thing, maintain your current cover status. We may need you to be available for rapid deployment, and that's easier if your family still believes you're just doing freelance consulting work." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I spent the rest of Wednesday and all of Thursday buried in classified databases that contained more information about global military activities than most world leaders ever saw. The pattern was worse than I'd initially suspected. Not only were the movements coordinated, but they were being executed by proxy forces, groups that maintained enough separation from their sponsors to provide plausible deniability. By Thursday evening, I'd identified what I believed was the target, a series of strategic choke points that, if controlled simultaneously, could disrupt global shipping lanes and energy supplies. The kind of coordinated action that could trigger economic chaos while making it nearly impossible to determine who was actually responsible. I was working late in my secure office, a space that officially didn't exist in a building that wasn't in any public directory, when my personal phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom's planning a family dinner Sunday. She wants to discuss your future." Fair warning. I stared at the message for a long moment. In less than 72 hours, I'd gone from family disappointment to potentially briefing the National Security Council on a developing international crisis. The disconnect between my two lives had never felt more surreal. My secure phone rang. Walsh again. We've got developments, he said without preamble. Can you be ready to brief senior officials tomorrow morning? Define senior officials, cabinet level. Possibly higher depending on your assessment. I looked around my office, maps covered in red pins, computer screens displaying satellite feeds, stacks of intelligence reports that revealed just how fragile global stability actually was. Somewhere in Connecticut, my parents were probably having dinner and discussing their disappointment in their directionless daughter. I'll be ready, I said. Friday morning's briefing was held in a conference room I'd never seen before, in a part of the building that required additional security clearances just to enter. The attendees included people whose faces I recognized from news broadcasts, though they looked different in person, older, more tired, carrying the weight of decisions that never made it into public discourse. I presented my analysis with the kind of clinical precision that my training had drilled into me. The coordinated movements weren't random, they were preparatory positioning for what appeared to be a multi-phase operation designed to create regional instability while maintaining plausible deniability for the actors involved. The mathematical models suggest we're looking at a timeline measured in days, not weeks, I concluded. If this follows the pattern of similar historical operations, the actual triggering event will happen when international attention is focused elsewhere. What kind of triggering event? Asked the Secretary of Defense. Something designed to look like an accident or isolated incident, but positioned to create maximum disruption. The goal isn't necessarily military conquest, it's economic and political destabilization that benefits the coordinating parties. The questions that followed revealed just how seriously my assessment was being taken. These weren't theoretical discussions about potential scenarios. They were operational planning sessions for how to respond to something that was already in motion. As the meeting concluded, I was asked to remain available for additional briefings over the weekend. The kind of availability that meant my phone would be monitored, my location would be tracked, and my schedule would be determined by developments in regions most Americans couldn't find on a map. I drove home through Friday afternoon traffic, passing families heading out for weekend activities, completely unaware that their government was quietly preparing for a potential international crisis. My phone buzzed with another text from Emma. Dad made reservations at Chez Laurent for Sunday dinner, the fancy place. This is going to be a serious what are you doing with your life's conversation. I pulled into my apartment parking garage and sat in my car for a moment, surrounded by the ordinary life I'd constructed to hide my extraordinary reality. In 36 hours, I'd be sitting across from my parents while they expressed their disappointment in my lack of career direction. They had no way of knowing that at that exact moment, their failed daughter might be receiving updates on a developing international situation that could reshape global politics. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so isolating. I was living two completely separate existences, and neither one felt entirely real anymore. Saturday morning shattered any illusion I had about enjoying a quiet weekend. My secure phone screamed to life at 5:47 a.m., with an emergency tone I'd only heard during training exercises. Martinez, we need you at Site 7 immediately. Walsh's voice was strained in a way I'd never heard before. Bring your go bag. Site 7 was code for a facility that didn't appear on any government maps, a crisis management center designed for situations too sensitive for the Pentagon. The fact that they wanted my go bag meant I might not be coming home for days. I threw on clothes and grabbed the pre-packed duffel bag every operative kept ready. As I drove through empty D.C. streets, emergency vehicles seemed to be everywhere. Not regular police or fire trucks, but the kind of unmarked federal response units that only appeared when something major was developing. The facility looked like an ordinary office building from the outside, but the security protocols were unlike anything I'd experienced. Biometric scanners, multiple checkpoints, and guards who checked my credentials against databases that updated in real time. This wasn't just high security, this was lockdown mode. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with controlled chaos. Multiple crisis teams worked simultaneously, their conversations creating a low hum of urgent coordination. Wall-mounted screens displayed live satellite feeds, communication intercepts, and data streams from sources around the globe. Walsh intercepted me before I could fully process the scene. The situation accelerated overnight, he said, leading me toward a secure briefing room. Your analysis was correct. but the timeline compressed. We're looking at hours, not days. The briefing room contained faces I'd seen only in classified photographs. The kind of people who made decisions that never appeared in newspapers but shaped international relations for decades. At the head of the table sat Director Margaret Foster, the woman whose actual job title was so classified that even her business cards were works of fiction. General Martinez, Foster addressed me directly. Your Thursday assessment predicted a triggering event designed to look accidental. At 03000 this morning, a cargo ship carrying humanitarian supplies suffered what appeared to be engine failure in international waters near the Suez Canal. The implications hit me immediately. The Suez Canal handled 12% of global trade. Any disruption there would ripple through international markets within hours. But it wasn't an engine failure, I said. Correct. Preliminary analysis suggests coordinated sabotage designed to block the canal during peak shipping hours. The vessel's positioning is too precise to be accidental, and our intelligence indicates unusual communication activity in the hours before the incident. Foster clicked through satellite images, showing the massive ship wedged across the canal, effectively creating a maritime traffic jam that would impact global commerce for weeks. But blocking shipping lanes was just the opening move. While international attention focuses on the canal crisis, she continued, our assets detected military mobilization in 3 separate regions. The proxy forces you identified are moving into position to exploit the economic disruption. I studied the tactical displays, my mind racing through the mathematical models I developed for exactly this scenario. They're not trying to start a war, I realized aloud. They're engineering economic instability to shorten global markets while positioning themselves to control alternative shipping routes. How long before the secondary actions begin? Asked a man whose nameplate read simply DoD classified. I pulled up my analysis software and began inputting real-time variables. The algorithms I'd spent 2 years perfecting churned through thousands of data points, calculating probabilities based on historical patterns, current positioning, and economic factors. Based on market opening times and optimal impact windows, I said, watching the numbers cascade across my screen, the coordinated secondary actions will begin at 1400 hours GMT. That's 9 a.m. Eastern. Foster checked her watch. 6 hours from now, what are you recommending? Asked another official whose presence suggested this briefing would directly inform presidential decision-making. I took a breath, knowing that my next words could influence responses that would affect millions of people. We need to position our assets to counter their proxy movements before they achieve strategic advantage. But more importantly, we need to demonstrate that their coordination isn't as invisible as they think. Explain. If we can prove the canal incident was coordinated with the military movements, we expose the entire operation. That changes this from multiple isolated incidents into a single coordinated action, which gives us unified response authority under existing international frameworks. The room erupted in focused discussion as officials weighed military options, diplomatic responses, and economic countermeasures. I provided tactical assessments while communications specialists coordinated with assets worldwide. For the next 4 hours, I existed in a world where my mathematical models directly influenced decisions that would shape international relations. At 11:30 a.m., Foster pulled me aside for a private conversation that would change everything. Rebecca, we need to discuss your operational status, she said, using my real name in a way that immediately got my attention. The situation is escalating beyond our initial projections. The president may need to authorize direct action to prevent regional destabilization. I understand. Do you? Because what I'm about to tell you is going to complicate your personal life significantly. Foster handed me a tablet displaying official documents I'd never seen before. Your operational cover is about to be compromised by necessity. I scanned the documents with a growing alarm. Presidential authorization for expanded intelligence operations, emergency protocols that could require key personnel to be secured for national security purposes. My name is listed among assets whose covers might need to be officially revealed to ensure their availability. We may need you to brief the president directly, Foster continued. Your analysis is driving policy decisions at the highest levels. That level of operational exposure means we can no longer guarantee your cover identity. The weight of her words settled over me. After years of living a double life, the carefully constructed walls between my two worlds were about to come crashing down. When? I asked. Potentially within hours. The president's schedule is being cleared for emergency briefings. If your projections about the 1400 GMT timeline prove correct, you may be called to the White House before this afternoon is over. I thought about my parents, probably spending their Saturday morning playing tennis at the country club, completely unaware that their disappointing daughter was helping coordinate responses to an international crisis. I thought about tomorrow's family dinner at Chez Laurent, where they planned to discuss my lack of career direction while I might be operating under presidential orders. That's the complicated part. For security reasons, immediate family members of personnel involved in classified presidential briefings must be monitored and potentially secured. Standard protocol. The implications were staggering. Not only would my cover be blown, but my parents and Emma would be swept into a world of security protocols and classified briefings they never asked to be part of. How much time do I have? That depends on developments over the next few hours. But Rebecca, Foster's expression grew serious. You need to understand that once this process begins, there's no going back to your previous cover status. Your family will learn who you really are, and what you really do, all of it. As if summoned by the universe's sense of dramatic timing, my personal phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Looking forward to tomorrow's dinner, darling. Your father has some thoughts about graduate school programs that might interest you. I stared at the message, then at the classified documents in my hands, then at the crisis management center buzzing with activity around me. In less than 24 hours, I'd gone from family disappointment to potentially briefing the President of the United States on matters of national security. I need to make some phone calls, I told Foster. Personal calls will need to be monitored and potentially restricted depending on security protocols, she replied. I'm sorry, Rebecca, but from this point forward, operational security takes precedence over personal privacy. I looked around the facility one more time, fully understanding that my life had just changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The career I'd hidden from my family was about to be revealed in the most dramatic way possible, and there was no script for how to explain to your parents that their failed daughter was actually helping prevent international disasters. My secure phone rang again. The crisis was accelerating, and I was about to be pulled deeper into a situation that would reshape not just international relations, but my entire personal existence. The call came at exactly 1:47 p.m., 13 minutes before my projected timeline for the secondary coordinated actions. My secure phone displayed a number I'd never seen before, but the encryption signature indicated it originated from the highest levels of government. General Martinez. This is Chief of Staff Thompson. The President requires your immediate presence at the White House for emergency consultation. Transportation is being arranged. Through the facility's windows, I could see a motorcade pulling up, the kind of official convoy that doesn't appear on any presidential schedule. Black SUVs with tinted windows, communication arrays that could coordinate with satellites, and the subtle but unmistakable presence of heavily armed security personnel. Foster appeared at my side as I gathered my classified materials. This is it, Rebecca. Once you walk into that motorcade, your operational cover ends permanently. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my parents at their tennis match, my sister probably shopping for wedding decorations, the comfortable fiction they'd lived with about my unsuccessful career. In 30 minutes, that fiction would be obliterated by reality in the most spectacular way possible. As prepared as anyone can be for their life to explode, I replied. The ride to the White House passed in a blur of secured communications and final briefing updates. My handler, Agent Patricia Mills, explained the protocol for presidential briefings while simultaneously coordinating with other agencies. The international situation had deteriorated exactly as my models predicted. Proxy forces were moving, markets were panicking, and world leaders were demanding explanations their intelligence services couldn't provide. The president's been briefed on your analysis, Mills said as we approached the White House gates. Your mathematical projections are the only assessment that accurately predicted this timeline. That makes you the primary strategic advisor for the administration's response. We entered through security checkpoints I'd only seen in movies, but the surreal nature of the experience was overshadowed by the gravity of what was happening. Intelligence updates streamed in through secure channels, shipping routes disrupted, Oil prices spiking, allied nations requesting American guidance on coordinated responses. The Oval Office was smaller than I'd expected, but filled with an intensity that made the air feel electric. President Harrison stood reviewing documents at the Resolute desk, while senior advisors provided rapid-fire updates on developing situations worldwide. When I entered, the room fell silent in a way that made clear my presence was the key element they'd been waiting for. "General Martinez," the president said, looking up from satellite photographs, "I understand you predicted this coordination when our other analysts saw only isolated incidents. Walk me through what happens next." For the next 45 minutes, I briefed the commander-in-chief on asymmetric warfare strategies, mathematical probability models, and the specific actions I recommended to counter what was essentially an economic attack, disguised as multiple unrelated crises. The president asked detailed questions that revealed he understood both the tactical and strategic implications of every recommendation. "How confident are you in these projections?" he asked after I'd outlined the potential cascading effects. "Mathematically, sir, we're looking at a 93% probability that the coordination will continue as modeled. The economic disruption is already exceeding their likely expectations, which means they'll accelerate their timeline to maximize advantage." Recommendations: coordinated counter-responses across multiple domains, military positioning to deter proxy actions, economic measures to stabilize affected markets, and diplomatic pressure to expose the coordination publicly. We need to make it impossible for them to maintain plausible deniability. The president nodded and turned to his advisors. "Make it happen. General Martinez, I need you to coordinate with the National Security Council on implementation. This is now a presidential-level operation with you as primary strategic advisor." As officials filed out to execute various aspects of the response plan, President Harrison approached me directly. "General, I understand your operational status requires significant personal sacrifices. I'm told your family isn't aware of your actual position." "That's correct, sir. That's about to change. For security reasons, immediate family members of personnel involved in ongoing presidential operations must be brought under protective protocols. We'll need to brief them on your actual role and ensure their security during this crisis." My heart stopped. "Sir, your parents and sister will be contacted within the hour and asked to report to a secure facility for their own protection. They'll be told that you're involved in sensitive government work related to current international developments." The president paused, seeming to understand the magnitude of what he was telling me. "I know this isn't how you wanted them to find out, General, but national security takes precedence. Your family will learn who you really are and what you really do, because their safety now depends on that knowledge." I left the White House in the same motorcade, but everything had changed. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Emma and 12 from my mother. The secure facility where my family was being taken was only 20 minutes away, but those 20 minutes felt like a lifetime. Agent Mills briefed me during the ride. "Your family was contacted at 15:30 hours. They were told that Rebecca Sinclair was involved in classified government work related to current international events, that their safety required immediate protective custody. They were not given specifics about your actual position or operational history." "How did they react?" "Your sister was cooperative but concerned. Your parents—" Mills hesitated. "Your parents initially thought it was some kind of mistake. They insisted there was no way their daughter could be involved in anything requiring federal protection." The secure facility looked like an upscale hotel from the outside, but the security measures and communication arrays revealed its true purpose. Inside, families of other personnel waited in comfortable but controlled environments while their loved ones handled classified crises. I found my family in a conference room that managed to feel both luxurious and imprisoning. Emma stood when she saw me, relief evident on her face. My parents remained seated at a polished table, their expressions cycling between confusion, concern, and something that looked like growing realization. "Rebecca," my mother said slowly, "there are federal agents here who claim you work for the government in some kind of classified position. They won't tell us anything specific, but they say it's related to an international emergency." I looked at the three people I loved most in the world, knowing that the next few minutes would change our relationship forever. The lies I'd told to protect them were about to be replaced by truths that would reshape how they saw me, how they understood our family dynamic, and how they viewed the disappointment they'd expressed for years. "Mom, Dad, Emma," I began, "there are some things about my work that I haven't been able to tell you, not because I wanted to lie, but because I legally couldn't share the information." My father leaned forward. "What kind of work, Rebecca?" I took a deep breath, knowing there was no way to ease into this revelation. "I'm a general in a classified division of the Department of Defense. I specialize in asymmetric threat assessment and international crisis management. For the past several years, what you thought was freelance consulting work was actually classified operations involving national security." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's eyes widened with understanding, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. My parents stared at me as if I'd revealed I was an entirely different person. "That's impossible," my mother whispered. You don't have a steady job. You live in that tiny apartment. You never—" "The apartment is covered, Mom. The financial struggles were part of maintaining operational security. I couldn't live in a way that would raise questions about my income sources or draw attention to my actual work." My father's medical training kicked in, and he began asking logical questions. "How long? What kind of operations? Why couldn't you tell us?" 6 years of active service, international threat assessment, crisis prevention, strategic planning for scenarios involving national security. I couldn't tell you because my oath required protecting not just government secrets, but protecting you from knowledge that could put you in danger." Emma spoke first. "The international events you always seem to know about before they hit the news. The way you'd disappear for days and come back exhausted. The questions you'd ask about geopolitics that seemed too sophisticated for someone writing instruction manuals. You noticed. I suspected you were involved in something important, but I never imagined." She gestured around the secure facility. My mother was still processing, her worldview shifting in real time. "You mean when we were criticizing your lack of career success, you were actually working at levels of government that most people never see?" Yes. The weight of years of disappointment, criticism, and family tension hung in the air. Every dismissive comment about my lack of ambition, every expression of concern about my directionless life, every comparison to Emma's conventional success, had been based on a complete misunderstanding of reality. My father asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why now? Why are we learning this now?" Before I could answer, Agent Mills entered the room with an expression that meant developments were accelerating. "General Martinez, we need you back at the White House immediately. The situation has escalated, and the President is requesting your direct input on response authorization." I looked at my family one more time, knowing that our conversation was far from over, but that duty was calling me back to the crisis that had exposed my secret life. "We'll finish this when I get back," I promised them. "But right now I have to go help prevent an international incident that could affect millions of people." As I left the room, I heard my mother say quietly to my father, "Our daughter is a general." The disappointment in her voice was gone, replaced by something that sounded like awe. The return to the White House came with an urgency that made my earlier visit seem routine. This time, Marine One was waiting on the facility's helipad. The presidential helicopter that I'd only seen in news footage was now my transportation to what Agent Mills described as the most critical briefing of the administration. During the 12-minute flight over Washington, encrypted communications poured through the aircraft's secure systems. The coordinated attacks had expanded beyond anyone's projections. Markets in 3 continents were in freefall. Allied nations were implementing emergency protocols. The mathematical models I'd developed were no longer predictions. They were real-time assessments of a crisis spiraling toward global economic catastrophe. "General," the pilot's voice crackled through my headset, "we're approaching the South Lawn. The President is waiting in the Situation Room with the full National Security Council." The Situation Room buzzed with controlled intensity unlike anything I'd experienced. Multiple screens displayed global financial markets, military positions, and communication intercepts from the coordinated operation. Every major intelligence agency was represented, their senior officials providing rapid updates on developments across 6 time zones. President Harrison looked up as I entered. "General Martinez, the situation has exceeded all projections. Your mathematical models are the only reliable framework we have for understanding what's happening. I need options, and I need them now." I moved to the central display console, my hands automatically interfacing with systems designed to process global intelligence in real time. The data streams confirmed my worst fears. The coordinated operation wasn't just succeeding, it was accelerating beyond the perpetrator's original timeline. President, we're looking at cascade failure across interconnected systems, I reported, manipulating displays to show the expanding crisis. The Suez blockage triggered automated trading responses that amplified market disruptions. The proxy military movements exploited that chaos to advance faster than anyone anticipated. What are our options? I pulled up strategic assessments I'd hoped we'd never need to implement. 3 approaches, sir. First, direct military intervention to secure the compromised shipping routes and counter proxy force advances. Second, coordinated economic countermeasures with allied nations to stabilize markets artificially. Third, exposure of the coordination through intelligence releases that force the perpetrators to halt operations to maintain plausible deniability. Risks and benefits of each approach. For the next hour, I briefed the most powerful people in the American government on game theory applications, asymmetric warfare responses, and mathematical probability assessments for outcomes that would affect millions of lives. The president made decisions based on my analysis that would reshape international relations for decades. Implement all 3 approaches simultaneously, he decided. General Martinez, I'm placing you in direct command of the analytical coordination for this operation. Report directly to me every 4 hours until resolution. As officials dispersed to execute the president's orders, I realized the magnitude of what had just happened. 6 days ago, my parents thought I was a failed consultant. Now I was commanding analytical operations for a presidential-level international crisis. The next 18 hours blurred into a continuous cycle of intelligence analysis, strategic assessment, and coordination with assets worldwide. My mathematical models guided military positioning, economic interventions, and diplomatic initiatives across multiple continents. The operation required precision timing that left no room for error. By Sunday morning, the coordinated attack was collapsing under the weight of American counter-responses. Markets stabilized as allied economic measures took effect. Proxy forces retreated as military positioning made their advances untenable. Intelligence releases exposed the coordination so thoroughly that continued operations became politically impossible for the perpetrators. At 0800 Sunday morning, President Harrison called me into the Oval Office for a private debriefing. General, your analysis prevented what could have been the most destabilizing international crisis in decades. The mathematical frameworks you developed are being implemented as permanent additions to our strategic assessment capabilities. Thank you, sir. There's something else. Your operational cover is permanently compromised now, but that opens opportunities we couldn't pursue while you were classified. I'm recommending you for promotion to Deputy Director of Strategic Assessment, with primary responsibility for developing new analytical frameworks for asymmetric threats. The position he described was exactly what I'd dreamed of during my training, the opportunity to use my skills at the highest levels of government while helping prevent the kinds of crises we'd just resolved. The position comes with public recognition, General. No more hiding your career from your family. No more living a cover story that diminishes your actual achievements. I thought about my parents still at the secure facility, processing the revelation that their disappointing daughter was actually a general who'd just helped prevent an international catastrophe. I accept, sir. The drive back to see my family felt different than any journey I'd ever taken. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't maintaining a cover story or managing operational security that required hiding my true accomplishments. I was simply Rebecca Sinclair, General in the United States military, returning to explain to my family how completely they'd misunderstood my life. I found them in the same conference room, though they looked like they'd spent the night processing information that challenged everything they thought they knew about me. Emma stood as I entered, her expression mixing pride with lingering bewilderment. "Is it over?" she asked. "The immediate crisis is resolved. The coordinated operation has been neutralized, markets are stabilizing, and the perpetrators have been exposed internationally." My father asked the question I could see in all their eyes. What happens now? With us, I mean, with our family. I sat across from them at the polished table where 24 hours earlier, they'd learned their daughter wasn't who they thought she was. Now we figure out how to be a family again, but with the truth instead of the fiction I've been living. I paused, gathering thoughts I'd imagined expressing for years. Mom, Dad, I know this changes everything you thought you knew about me. Every time you worried about my career direction, every time you compared me to Emma's conventional success, every time you felt disappointed in my lack of ambition, you were seeing a carefully constructed lie, designed to protect both my work and your safety. My mother spoke first, her voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before. Rebecca, we spent years thinking that you couldn't find your direction. We were so worried about your future, so frustrated with what we saw as wasted potential. The potential wasn't wasted, Mom. It was classified. My father leaned forward with the analytical mindset that made him an excellent surgeon. Help us understand the scope of what you do. The agents here won't give us details, but they've implied your work affects national security at the highest levels. I develop mathematical models for predicting and countering threats that most people never hear about. The work I've been doing for the past 6 years has helped prevent multiple international incidents that could have led to regional conflicts. This weekend's crisis was just the first time my operational cover had to be revealed publicly. Emma asked the question that addressed our family dynamic directly. How do we move forward from here? How do we rebuild our relationship based on who you actually are, instead of who we thought you were? We start with honesty, I said. No more cover stories, no more fictional financial struggles, no more hiding my accomplishments to maintain operational security. From now on, when you ask about my work, I can give you real answers within the limits of what's still classified. My mother reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture she hadn't made since I was a child. I owe you an apology, Rebecca. We owe you many apologies. For years of disappointment that was based on complete misunderstanding. For criticism that must have been incredibly painful when you couldn't defend yourself with the truth. You couldn't have known, Mom. That was the point. But we could have trusted you more, my father added. We could have believed that someone as intelligent and capable as you wouldn't simply drift through life without purpose. We let our expectations blind us to the possibility that you had reasons for the choices you were making. The conversation continued for hours, as we worked through years of accumulated misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and missed connections. Emma admitted she'd suspected I was involved in something important, but had never imagined the scale. My parents grappled with the realization that their failed daughter had actually achieved success at levels they'd never dreamed possible. By late afternoon, when we were finally cleared to leave the secure facility, something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. The disappointment that had characterized their view of me for years had been replaced by pride mixed with bewilderment at how completely they'd misunderstood my life. As we walked toward the parking area, my mother asked one final question. That family dinner we had planned for tonight at Chez Laurent, are we still doing that? I laughed, remembering how terrified I'd been of that conversation just 3 days earlier. We can still have dinner, Mom, but instead of discussing my lack of career direction, maybe we can talk about the promotion I just accepted to Deputy Director of Strategic Assessment. My father stopped walking and stared at me. Deputy Director? It comes with public recognition, a significant salary increase, and the opportunity to work on preventing international crises as a permanent assignment. Emma grinned. So much for being the successful sibling. As we drove home, to their house, where I was invited for the first time in months without the underlying tension of their disappointment, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in 72 hours. The career I'd hidden from my family was now public. The mathematical models I'd developed in secret were being implemented at the highest levels of government. The family relationships damaged by years of necessary deception were healing with remarkable speed. That evening at Chez Laurent, instead of defending my fictional lack of direction, I found myself explaining asymmetric threat assessment to my parents while Emma asked increasingly sophisticated questions about international relations. For the first time in 6 years, I could share my professional accomplishments with the people whose opinion mattered most to me. The waiter who brought our champagne had no idea he was serving a family celebrating the resolution of an international crisis and the restoration of relationships damaged by necessary secrets. To him, we probably looked like any successful family enjoying Sunday dinner together. And in a way, that's exactly what we were. 3 months later, I stood in the East Room of the White House, wearing a dress uniform I'd never been able to display publicly before. The ceremony wasn't on any public schedule. Most Americans would never know it happened, but for me, it represented the culmination of a journey from family disappointment to presidential recognition. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the White House protocol chief, the President of the United States. President Harrison entered with the measured pace of someone who understood the weight of every public moment. Behind him walked my parents and Emma, still adjusting to the reality that their formerly directionless daughter was about to receive one of the highest honors in American intelligence service. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of professional transformation and family reconciliation. My promotion to Deputy Director of Strategic Assessment had come with responsibilities I'd only dreamed of during my classified years. Instead of working in anonymous facilities, I now briefed cabinet members in conference rooms that appeared in history books. Instead of hiding my expertise behind fictional consulting work, I testified before congressional committees on asymmetric threat prevention. Deputy Director Martinez, the president began, reading from a citation that outlined accomplishments most Americans would never hear about, for exceptional service in preventing international crises through innovative analytical frameworks and strategic assessment capabilities that have become foundational to American intelligence operations. The medal he pinned to my uniform represented more than professional achievement. It symbolized the end of a double life that had nearly destroyed my relationship with the people I loved most. As cameras captured the moment for presidential archives, I caught my mother's eye. She was crying, but these were tears of pride rather than the disappointment that had characterized our relationship for years. After the ceremony, we gathered in a private dining room where my family could finally ask questions they'd been accumulating for months. The security restrictions had been relaxed enough that I could share details about my work that would have been impossible during my classified years. "I still can't quite believe it," my father said, examining the medal with the precise attention he usually reserved for surgical instruments. "For 6 years, we thought you were struggling to find your place in the world." "I had found my place," I replied. "I just couldn't tell you where it was." Emma, who had spent the past 3 months researching intelligence careers with the same intensity she brought to legal cases, asked the question that got to the heart of our family's transformation. "Looking back, were there signs we should have noticed? Things that might have told us you weren't really struggling?" I considered her question carefully. "Remember when I helped you research international law for that case involving overseas corporate structures? I knew details about foreign banking regulations that someone writing instruction manuals shouldn't have known. I thought you'd just done really thorough research," she admitted. "Or when I'd disappear for weeks at a time and come back exhausted, but unable to explain where I'd been." My mother nodded slowly. "We assumed you were taking temporary jobs that didn't work out. Jobs you were embarrassed to talk about because they weren't successful. I was working in crisis situations that I couldn't discuss because they were classified at levels most government employees never see." The conversation continued over dinner, weaving through years of misunderstandings that were finally being resolved with honest communication. My parents asked about the mathematical models I'd developed, the strategic frameworks that had prevented international incidents, and the analytical techniques that had made me valuable enough to warrant presidential recognition. "The work you do," my father said thoughtfully, "it's not just academically impressive, it actually prevents conflicts that could affect millions of people. That was always the goal." During my training, they showed us historical examples of conflicts that started small and escalated because no one understood the mathematical patterns underlying the progression. My models are designed to identify those patterns early enough to prevent escalation. My mother, who had spent decades in charitable work focused on international humanitarian efforts, suddenly understood the broader implications. "The crises you prevent, they're the ones that would create exactly the kind of humanitarian disasters my organizations work to address after they happen. Prevention is more effective than response," I agreed, "and significantly less costly in terms of human suffering." As dinner concluded, President Harrison joined us for a brief private conversation that would have been unimaginable just 3 months earlier. He spoke directly to my parents about the importance of my work and the personal sacrifices required by careers in classified intelligence. "Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair," he said, "I want you to understand that your daughter's work has prevented multiple international incidents that could have led to regional conflicts. The mathematical frameworks she developed are now being used by intelligence agencies worldwide to predict and counter asymmetric threats. My father, who had performed surgery on world leaders and wasn't easily intimidated, seemed genuinely awed by the scope of what the president was describing. We had no idea the level of impact her work was having. That was by design, the president replied. The most effective intelligence work happens in complete anonymity. Your daughter sacrificed public recognition for her achievements to maintain operational security. That kind of dedication to duty is extraordinarily rare. After the president left, we moved to the White House's private family quarters, where my family could process the day's events without the formal atmosphere of official ceremonies. Emma sat curled in an antique chair that had probably hosted conversations involving every major political figure of the past century. I keep thinking about all the times Mom and Dad worried about your future, she said. All the family dinners where they tried to give you career advice. All the conversations where they wondered why someone as smart as you couldn't find professional direction. The irony wasn't lost on me, I admitted. There were nights when I'd come home from briefings involving global security threats and find voicemails from moms suggesting I consider getting a real estate license. My mother laughed, but it was tinged with regret. We meant well, but we were so completely wrong about everything. You weren't wrong to care about my future, I said. You were just working with incomplete information. I made a choice to prioritize national security over family transparency, and that choice had consequences for our relationships. My father, who had been quietly contemplating the day's revelations, asked a question that addressed the heart of our family's transformation. What happens now? With your career, I mean. This level of public recognition changes things significantly. He was right. The presidential ceremony had essentially ended my ability to work in completely classified environments. My promotion to deputy director came with public responsibilities that made anonymous operations impossible. The work changes, but it doesn't diminish, I explained. Instead of preventing crises in secret, I'll be developing analytical frameworks that other operatives can use, training the next generation of strategic analysts, working with international partners on cooperative threat assessment. But no more double life, Emma observed. No more hiding your accomplishments behind fictional struggles. No more lies by necessity, I confirmed. From now on, when you ask about my work, I can give you real answers within the bounds of what remains classified. As the evening wound down, we found ourselves in the White House garden, surrounded by security personnel who maintained respectful distances while ensuring our protection. The setting was surreal, my family and I having intimate conversations in one of the most secure locations in America. There's something I need to say, my mother began, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated regret. For years, we made you feel like a disappointment when you were actually achieving things we couldn't even imagine. We criticized your choices when we should have trusted your judgment. We worried about your future when you were already succeeding at the highest levels of government service. Mom, let me finish, she continued. You endured years of our disappointment and criticism without being able to defend yourself with the truth. You allowed us to believe you were failing when you were actually excelling, because your oath required that sacrifice. That level of personal sacrifice for duty is something we should have recognized, even without knowing the specifics. My father nodded in agreement. We raised you to be intelligent, capable, and principled. When your choices seemed to contradict those qualities, we should have trusted that you had reasons we didn't understand, rather than assuming you'd lost direction. The apology was more comprehensive than anything I'd imagined during my years of hidden service. They weren't just apologizing for their disappointment, they were acknowledging that their lack of trust in my judgment had been a failure of faith in the person they'd raised. I forgive you, I said simply, but I also understand why you reacted the way you did. From your perspective, I had graduate degrees from prestigious institutions but couldn't maintain steady employment. I had demonstrated intelligence but made choices that seemed to waste that intelligence. Without the context of my actual work, your concerns were entirely rational. Emma stood up and walked to where the White House lawn met the carefully maintained gardens. I have a confession, she said. I never believed you were really struggling. Something about your situation never made sense to me. What do you mean? You were too calm about your supposed financial problems. Too knowledgeable about current events for someone working random consulting jobs. Too confident for someone who was supposedly failing at life. She turned back to face us. I suspected you were involved in something important, but I never imagined it was this important. Why didn't you say anything? Because I figured if you wanted us to know, you'd tell us. I trusted that you had reasons for keeping your work private. Her faith in my judgment stood in stark contrast to our parents' years of worry and criticism. It was a reminder that trust could survive uncertainty, even when circumstances appeared to contradict everything a family thought they knew about each other. As we prepared to leave the White House, I realized how fundamentally our family dynamic had shifted. 3 months earlier, I'd been the disappointing daughter whose lack of direction worried everyone. Now I was the family member whose career achievements exceeded anything they'd imagined possible. The drive back to their house, my childhood home that I could now visit without the underlying tension of their disappointment, felt like traveling between two different versions of reality. We passed the country club where Emma's engagement party had become the catalyst for revealing my secret life. We drove by the restaurant where they'd planned to discuss my lack of career direction, not knowing their failed daughter was actually preventing international crises. Next month's family dinner is going to be quite different, my mother observed as we pulled into their driveway. How so? Well, instead of worrying about your future, we'll be asking about your work preventing global catastrophes. Instead of suggesting career options, we'll be trying to understand mathematical models for predicting asymmetric threats. Instead of feeling concerned about your direction, we'll be feeling proud of achievements we can barely comprehend. That night, I stayed in my childhood bedroom for the first time in years. The room looked exactly as I'd left it after college. Achievements and awards from my academic years, photographs from family vacations, books that had shaped my early interest in mathematics and international relations. Looking around the room, I could trace the path that had led from teenage academic success to classified government service. The signs had been there all along: my fascination with pattern recognition, my interest in international affairs, my ability to see connections others missed. My parents had raised someone perfectly suited for the career I'd chosen, even though they hadn't recognized that suitability when my path required secrecy. The next morning, over breakfast in their kitchen, my father asked a question that addressed our family's future rather than its past. What do we tell people, friends who've heard us worry about your career for years? I smiled, remembering all the times they'd shared their concerns about my direction with family, friends, and relatives. You tell them the truth, that I work for the Department of Defense in strategic assessment, and that my previous work required security clearances that prevented public discussion. That's going to be quite a revelation for people who've heard us worry about your employment prospects, my mother said. Think of it as a dramatic plot twist in the family's story, Emma suggested. The disappointing daughter was actually a secret government operative the whole time. As I prepared to leave for my new office at the Pentagon, an office with windows and my name on the door, rather than the anonymous facilities I'd worked in for years, my mother walked me to my car. Rebecca, she said, I want you to know that we're not just proud of your professional achievements. We're proud of the person you became during those difficult years. You maintained your integrity, your commitment to family, and your sense of humor even while carrying burdens we couldn't share or understand. Thank you, Mom. And I want you to know that if you ever have to make similar choices in the future, choices that require personal sacrifice for duty, you'll have our complete support, even if we don't understand the specifics. Driving to work that morning, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed in just 3 months. The international crisis that had exposed my secret career had also restored my family relationships. The professional recognition that ended my anonymous service had also ended years of hidden achievements and fictional struggles. My new office came with responsibilities I'd never imagined during my classified years. Instead of preventing crises in secret, I was now developing frameworks that other analysts could use. Instead of briefing officials on specific threats, I was training the next generation of strategic assessment specialists. Instead of hiding my expertise behind cover stories, I was testifying before congressional committees and consulting with international partners. The work was different, but the mission remained the same: using mathematical analysis to identify patterns that could prevent conflicts before they escalated beyond control. The difference was that now I could take pride in my achievements publicly, share my expertise openly, and discuss my work with the family whose opinion mattered most to me. 6 months after that disastrous engagement party, where my mother declared I had nothing to show for my 32 years, I sat in a congressional hearing room explaining asymmetric threat assessment methodologies to senators whose decisions would affect international security policy. In the gallery, my parents watched their formerly disappointing daughter provide expert testimony that would influence American strategic planning for decades. The journey from family disappointment to presidential recognition had taken less than a year, but it had required a lifetime of choices that prioritized duty over personal recognition. The mathematical models I'd developed in secret were now being implemented openly. The expertise I'd hidden behind fictional struggles was now being shared at the highest levels of government. Most importantly, the family relationships that had been damaged by necessary deception were now stronger than they'd ever been, built on truth rather than the carefully constructed lies that had protected both my work and their safety. As I walked out of the Capitol building that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Watched the hearing online. I still can't believe my sister is testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee. Mom and Dad are telling everyone who'll listen that their daughter is a strategic assessment expert. I smiled, remembering how terrified I'd been of their disappointment just months earlier. Now their pride was as overwhelming as their disappointment had once been crushing. The transformation was complete. The secret life that had defined my career for 6 years was over, replaced by open service at levels I'd never imagined possible. The family relationships that had suffered under the weight of necessary deception were healed, stronger for having survived the revelation of such a fundamental misunderstanding. And the work, the mathematical analysis of threats that could reshape international relations, continued at scales that made my classified years seem like preparation for what was now possible. The disappointing daughter had become a presidential advisor. The family failure had become a strategic asset. The mathematical models developed in secret had become frameworks for preventing the kinds of conflicts that shaped history. It was by any measure a successful transformation from disappointment to recognition. But more than that, it was proof that sometimes the most important work happens in complete anonymity, and that the greatest achievements require sacrifices that can't be shared until the moment when secrecy gives way to the recognition that was always deserved. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.